Hello, my name is Eben Rose. I'm running for public office for Maine State Senate in District 29 in the state of Maine. And I'm making a series of YouTube videos, putting them on a YouTube channel, because we can't go out canvassing. We're in lockdown. This is the third week we're in lockdown now. And many of us are at home with our thoughts and our fears, perhaps, about what the future will have in store for us. The immediate concern is, of course, our health, but the aftermath of this game-changing historical situation is still unfolding. And while we're in this sort of lockdown situation, it might be a good time, and is indeed a good time, for us to think about the world that we want and that the world we can actually build if we start to think about things differently. So the past couple of videos that I've made address this question of economics, specifically home economics. You know, governments tend to treat economics as if it's a secret language, some sort of black box, like some priestly class of conveners will go behind this curtain and come out with these economic models. And, you know, governments tend to pay, state governments, for example, tends to pay consultancies, sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars for an economic analysis. Economics used to be called political economics. That was sort of the combined term. It was about trying to understand how the goods that are needed in society are produced and how they're traded, how it goes from the demand to supply or supply to demand, how utility is realized. Home economics is a good place to start, a good place to ground all of this, because we know what we need. These are our fundamental human needs. So the question should always be how it's delivered there. So if I end up in Augusta with your support, I will certainly not be one of those who shies away from this term economics. I lean into it. I think it's a time for all of us to become much more literate in economics and not get down the rabbit hole of trying to over-quantify things, because our fundamental human needs, again, the last video about fundamental human needs, are the core of what we need. And during this pandemic, we're certainly getting a better sense for the important things in life. So a little bit more time will be spent on the quantification part, but I kind of want to steer everyone away from that and own this term economics and lean into it. So in this video, and at least a couple of the videos to follow, I'm going to be unpacking some of these economic concepts and terms in a way that I think will be accessible for everyone. The thought is repulsive to me, but I guess not altogether surprising, that many conservative pundits and lawmakers, policymakers, have made statements about sacrificing some of the weakest among us, the elderly perhaps, for the economy. I want to remind them, and I want to remind everyone, and I would remind everyone who I might encounter as a lawmaker myself, that the economy works for people. The economy works for us. It's about human development. It's not about us working for it. So this sort of market cult has just taken over our thoughts lately. So has dominated our political thought since the Reagan era. And this is something that if we expect to emerge in a better world out of this epidemic, then we need to put some of this language on the table squarely and confront it directly. So no, we do not work for the economy. And no, we do not live to work for the economy. So today I'm going to speak about a concept that any economist worth his or her salt should understand, and that's Pareto analysis or Pareto optimization. And business leaders should know this as well, because I believe it's taught in business school, or should be taught in business school. These business leaders tend to put a value on themselves that's much, much more than salt. But nevertheless, just an expression. Pareto optimization is a concept of social well-being. Remember that promoting the general welfare is a constitutional obligation Just like providing for the common defense. We sometimes forget that promoting the general welfare, that there actually is the word welfare in the Constitution. So if we have this kind of commitment as a government, then we should be concerning ourselves in a rigorous way about how the general welfare is actually promoted. So Pareto optimization is a rigorous mathematical way to sort of look at utility, that is, the use of something, something that's desired in a marketplace, is not only benefiting the person who is trading it, the person who is buying it, and the person who is, or firm that is offering it, but also to see if it damages anyone else. So rather than get into the rigorous mathematics of it and the number of assumptions that go into Pareto optimization and Pareto calculations, I think a good way to explain it is by way of a story told by famed science fiction author Ursula Le Guin. And the story is called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. So, Omelas. Omelas is a fictional place. It's science fiction after all. It's some village that is described by author Le Guin as being idyllic. There's a celebration going on, picture of Renaissance fair in perpetuity. Everyone's happy. They seem to have everything they want. It's like a perfect society. But there's one thing that's known about Omelas, known by everyone there, but really only deeply known by some, and that is that in some dark corner of the city, in some dark basement, is a child there who's emaciated, cold, not able to participate in normal Omelas life. And this poor child, has a bucket and a mop, and there's no real explanation for what role the child plays specifically, but it's known to pretty much all the villagers of Omelas that this child's basic imprisonment is what's necessary to keep all the festivities and all the lively economy, as it were, of Omelas alive and thriving. So there are some villagers in Omelas who know about this child and who venture out to see this phenomenon, to see this wretched, poor creature in this dank and dismal chamber. And when they do, they're forever changed. And those are the ones who decide that all of this prosperity is just not ethical. It's just not proper and right, as long as they know that the compromise is that this child has to be enslaved. Those are the ones who walk away from Omelas. And when they leave the city, they know they're going into some unknown. They won't have the security of the fine festivities that they are used to in Omelas, but they're ready to build the world anyway without this ethical compromise. So that important story, I think, is where we are in our economics. It's where we've long been, and it's where we tend to go the more that labeling laws are reduced, the more that supply chains are obscured. I know that many of you like to purchase maybe free-range eggs or organic foods or fair trade coffee or dolphin-free tuna, that sort of thing. And this kind of labeling is really, really important because most of us, I think, want to make ethical choices. We don't mind necessarily being in a consumer economy as long as we can be at peace and not have cognitive dissonance over wanting to be ethical people on the one hand, but somehow knowing that most of the purchases we make, we are completely blinded as to whether there is some child in a dank basement somewhere, Pakistan, or even here in the United States, that allows us to enjoy the utility we get out of our consumer products or services. So we basically live in Omelas, no surprise. That's the mechanism that Ursula Le Guin uses to illustrate a condition that we have in our society. These ethical compromises we kind of know are there, but we make anyway. And what's shocking to me then, going back to the beginning, is this idea that some conservatives have that this is all necessary for us to have an economy. It's not necessary for us to have an economy. Pareto analysis gives us the rigorous tools that anyone who's in the business community, anyone who is making a CEO's salary, who claims to have all this knowledge about how money flows, need to be put to the task of describing things in Pareto optimization terms. So let me put Pareto analysis and the story of Omelas to some practical use here. Do you remember Mike Bloomberg? Of course you do. About a month ago, it seems like forever, he was the big upstart contender wanting to buy his way into full nomination and being a viable contestant on the choose the Democratic side of the presidential race. So I got a message from Emmy from the Mike for President campaign a month or so ago, and it said, "Hey, this is Emmy from Mike's Bloomberg's campaign. You want to contribute, help us, phone bank or whatever?" I said, yeah, no. But more specifically, this is what I said. I said, my hope and suggestion for Mike, I'm reading it straight from the thing here, my hope and suggestion for Mike and all other millionaires and billionaires is this: hire the design and engineering talent that will allow him to live the good life truly sustainably. Also, hire the accounting talent to transparently demonstrate the ethical provenance of his consumption. Why? Because this is what is needed for any of us to live a sustainable and ethical good life. And high net worth individuals like Mike can afford it. Let that private capital trickle down. So as a legislator, during committee hearings, often when the legislature is dealing with regulations of some kind of new regulation, maybe an environmental regulation, what often happens, almost invariably happens, is you'll hear about pass-through costs, right? So want to regulate tank farm emissions, for example. Well, that's going to increase the cost of our operations, and then all these people who need our services are going to suffer. Every time that I hear this argument, the argument about pass-through costs, every time as a legislator I will say, and I will do the homework beforehand to find out the answers, I will ask them, how much does your CEO make? How much does your top tier of executives earn? And what is their carbon footprint? And at first that might be shocking or be seen as inappropriate. We don't really talk about salaries here. It absolutely needs to be on the table, because here's the cost coming into the operation, then there's a reservoir of how much stays in the operation, and then the pass-through is, somehow this is all going to be borne by the consumers, borne by poor people, or, borne by the public at large. I want to know what that carbon footprint is in this reservoir here, because that is what we are paying for in South Portland with our lung health, for example, with these tank farms. It's what we are all dealing with. It's the suffering. We are all, in a sense, that person, that child in the dark basement. So I thought I would close this session with a poem by Wendell Berry called Questionnaire. How much poison are you willing to eat for the success of the free market and global trade? Please name your preferred poisons. For the sake of goodness, how much evil are you willing to do? Fill in the following blanks with the names of your favorite evils and acts of hatred. What sacrifices are you prepared to make for culture and civilization? Please list the monuments, shrines, and works of art you would most willingly destroy. In the name of patriotism and the flag, how much of our beloved land are you willing to desecrate? List in the following spaces the mountains, rivers, towns, farms you could most readily do without. State briefly the ideas, ideals, or hopes, the energy sources, the kinds of security for which you would kill a child. Name, please, the children whom you would be willing to kill. So, poem called Questionnaire by Wendell Berry. So once again, my name is Eben Rose. I'm a candidate on the Democratic side for Maine State Senate. I'm the only one of the three of us candidates who are a clean elections candidate on the Democratic side. That's an effort by the state to keep the potentially corrupting influence of money out of politics, but it does require quite a number of $5 contributions from registered voters in District 29. That's Cape Elizabeth, South Portland, and a little sliver of Scarborough along the coast by Higgins Beach. So if you are in District 29 and a registered voter, I would very much appreciate a $5 contribution. Go to ebbenrose.com, and there you'll find a button that takes you directly to the website, the state website for these contributions. So be well, be safe, keep your hygiene, keep your distances, keep indoors, but keep your contacts, keep your loved ones. Think about what's important in life, and when we emerge from this, maybe we'll be smarter and better adapted to face the challenges yet to come.